Me personally, yeah, I'm a pie guy through and through. Even though my last name says I'm sick of them, we all know that'll never happen. Mainly due to one reason, and that's a perfect pie crust. It's flaky, buttery, salty, and sweet. Let's turn up the heat. All of this is going to be done by hand, mainly to show you that you don't need a food processor or mixers to make a good pie crust. Bring in a large bowl and measure out 454 grams of flour. I've got all-purpose, but pastry flour would be ideal. At the end of the day, it shouldn't matter too much. I would just use what you've got on hand. Arguably the most important ingredient, 300 grams of butter. Cut that butter up into cubes and add the cubes directly to the flour. Make sure this butter is unsalted because you want to know how much salt you're adding to this dough. So just get the unsalted stuff. Get in there with your hands, pinch those cubes together, kind of break them up into pea-sized pieces. And once everything's even and uniform, we're going in with equal parts of water and milk. 82 grams of milk and 82 grams of water. Now on top of that, we're going in with that salty sweet action, so 9 grams of salt and 14 grams of sugar. Take a fork, start to mix, incorporate all these ingredients together, and once it starts to ball up, get back in there with your hands and mash it together into a nice ball. Once it's all packed into a ball, take some plastic wrap it up, stick this in the fridge for about 30 minutes. That'll allow that butter in that ball to kind of stiffen back up, get nice and cold, and it'll be easier to work with once you go to roll it out. Flour down your work surface and drop that chilled ball right into that flour. Dust the dough ball with all that flour, bring in your rolling pin, and now we begin to roll. As you roll out one side, take your time, rotate the dough, roll out the other side. Make sure you're pressing evenly. Keep rolling out until it's nice and thin, about 1/4 to 1/2 inch thick, and perfectly round. Make sure it's not looking like the state of Texas. Now this crust is just going to be going into a classic 9-inch pie plate. If yours is smaller or bigger, no worries, just adjust as necessary. When you're rolling this out, you want to get the crust 2 to 3 inches past that pie plate. You can kind of discard all the rough edges, and then once you're left with the dough you're going to use, roll that dough up onto the rolling pin, and then unroll that dough directly into the pie plate. Fold the extra 2 to 3 inches right under that edge, and then with your fingers just like this, you can crimp the sides and make it look like a nice little crown. And once it looks just like this, your dough is ready to be frozen. That is if you need a fully cooked pie crust. If you're making an apple pie or a pumpkin pie, fill this crust up, raw dough, filling, if you want the top dough, and you can bake it straight away. If you need a partially cooked or fully cooked, you're definitely going to want to freeze it. This will ensure that butter's nice and cold, frozen, and once it gets in that heat, it's not just going to melt and turn into a puddle. So now throw this crust into your freezer for about an hour. Once that pie crust is ready to come out of the freezer, we need to blind bake the pie crust. If you don't know what that means, I'll explain it. So basically, a pie has a filling. When you need a fully baked pie crust, but you don't want to bake the filling, you need something to replace the filling so that way the bottom of the pie crust doesn't bubble up. You basically just want it to keep its shape. So we're going to add rice, beans, pie weights, any of those work. I'll just be going in with uncooked dry rice. To do this, set your oven to 425. We need that oven nice and hot to really set this crust, and then we'll end up lowering the temperature, but for now, 425. Now after that hour's up, your pie crust should be frozen or at least pretty close to it. We can't just dump rice or beans directly into that crust, so get some parchment paper, fold it up like you're making a snowflake, frill the ends, and now unravel it and pour your rice or your beans directly on. Now into that 425-degree oven for about 15 minutes. Now out of the oven, 15 minutes later, you can see that crust on the edges is starting to take on some color. The center is starting to dry out. That's exactly what we want because we want from the edges to the center to be nice and crispy and golden brown. Now right here is your partially baked crust. If that's what you need, fill it with whatever filling you need, put it back in the oven, and finish the pie. If you need a fully baked crust, continue watching because now we're going to egg wash this. Crack in an egg, splash of water, scramble it up, and start to brush. Make sure you get the edges, the sides, and the bottom. And now just to make sure that bottom really doesn't bubble up, take a fork, and this is called docking. Just simply poke the bottom of that crust. This will ensure the steam has somewhere to go, and it should bake nicely without having to add in more rice or beans. Make sure you do this step after the egg wash because if you dock the crust and then egg wash, the egg wash will just fill in those holes and it will be pointless. Throw this back in the oven for 15 minutes, and after 15 minutes, reduce the heat to 375 degrees, and bake for another 10 to 20 minutes, watching the crust, making sure it doesn't get too brown. Sometime within that 10-minute range, your crust will be finished. Nice and crispy, flaky, golden brown. Here's a little tip: if the edges of the pie crust are taking on too much color, you can take some foil and tent the crust. This basically means you're just going to wrap foil around the edges, protect the edges from the heat, but that heat will be able to drop down into the center and still cook the bottom. After all that time's up, your crust should be just like this: golden brown, flaky, salty, and sweet. This would be perfect for a banana cream pie, a chocolate pie, anything that doesn't need to be cooked. Fill this crust and you're gonna have yourself a delicious pie. And now you gotta be very careful. Out of that pie plate, boom, golden brown, perfect crown. That base, nice and golden brown, crispy, flaky. It's salty and sweet, you gotta trust me. Not like sweet, but you know, it's just well balanced. There's 3 stages. You got that raw, you've got the partially cooked, and the fully cooked. If you like this video, give it a big fat thumbs up, smash that subscribe button, consider making this, and until next time, peace.